Kate, it's a great privilege for me to welcome you to this virtual interview. I'm delighted to have you here, and we're grateful to you for finding the time in your very busy schedule to speak to us today. For anyone who knows anything about Scottish politics, your name is instantly recognisable. You were elected in 2016 as the member of the Scottish Parliament for Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch. Until 2018, you were a busy backbencher, serving across a wide variety of parliamentary committees and cross-party groups at Holyrood. In June 2018, as a recognised rising star of Scottish politics, you were appointed as Minister for Public Finance and Digital Economy. And it was in that role that you reached a significant moment of your career so far, when you delivered the budget statement in February this year. It was not only a significant moment in your career, it was a history-making moment because you became the first woman to deliver a budget statement at either Scottish or Westminster parliaments. Less than a fortnight after delivering the budget statement, you made history again. There's a recurring theme here when you were promoted to Cabinet Secretary for Finance and became the first woman to hold the post. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that amongst your many accolades, you're a fluent Gaelic speaker. My mother-in-law, who is a native Gaelic speaker, tells me that Gaelic is the language of heaven. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's a neat way for me to segue in to mention that you're also a strong advocate of freedom of religious expression. And I know that your own Christian faith is important to you. Listen, I've said enough, and no one wants to hear any more from me, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say to us. So let me start with my first question, can I, Kate? And it's this. When you were growing up, where was home for you, and what was family life like for you when you were growing up as a child?
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's great to be able to join you, albeit virtually. I think that probably for me is one of the hardest questions to answer. I'm sure we'll go on to even harder questions, but knowing where home was from an early age was very challenging because our family moved around quite a lot. My dad worked for an organisation which may be familiar to some of you, the Navigators, which took him to India doing Bible work with students, and then back to Scotland, to Glasgow, and then back to India again, where he was working as a finance director for a group of mission hospitals. So we moved a lot within India, and we clearly moved a lot within Scotland as well. So I think by the age of 15, I had gone to multiple different schools and had a growing identity crisis. And so that has served me probably quite well in politics, where it comes to engaging with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, because I'm not sure that I fit neatly into any particular identity and can't, whilst I know I've got strong Highland roots, I moved around so much that it's difficult to know exactly who I am. In terms of family life was mixed and varied, as you would expect from living in lots of different countries. The one common theme, of course, from the very beginning was faith, because that was the reason given for all these different moves. Every time our lives were disrupted yet again, the reason was quite clearly stated that my parents felt that God was calling them to either a new country, a new job, a new location, and therefore by extension that applied to us as we started in our new schools, trying to make new friends and adjusting to new life. So the common theme throughout was always faith, and I suppose family life was shaped very much by that. It's also shaped very much by a sense of duty, a sense of public duty, a sense of using your gifts and your experiences to serve God, but also to serve others, and never taking anything for granted. So we had years where my dad didn't earn a penny, and we were reliant on other people's generosity and God's gifts, and other times where we did have. So it was a sense of learning how to be content in all circumstances. And certainly life was an adventure and sometimes a roller coaster growing up.
That is really helpful, Kate. You talked about moving around a lot. Did you find it unsettling moving around as a child, or did you just, you've mentioned the word adventure, did you see this as just a great adventure and just embrace that change and adapt to it accordingly? Or did you find it unsettling every time you moved to a different place?
I don't think it could be anything other than unsettling, to be honest. I remember starting my, I don't know, let's say fifth new school and thinking that it hadn't got any easier, because as a teenager, starting in new schools and starting to make new friends is always going to be unsettling. There's no two ways about it. And so from that perspective, it was unsettling, moving from the safe confines of Scotland to India when I was 10 years old, seeing poverty in all its starkness as a young girl, knowing that you see life and death very visibly for the first time, and being in a new school. All of those things are very unsettling for young minds. But I think with difficult situations like that, they leave an impact, and they can either be scars that you carry with you for the rest of your lives, or, as we like to say in our family, they become muscles. And I think that those early experiences of moving around a lot and seeing lots of difficult things, close friends passing away. One very um, uh, early experience of another missionary family's youngest child contracting rabies and dying very suddenly, at a very young age. So those things stick with you, but they shape you. They form your views on things, but ultimately they can become scars that you live with, or they can actually strengthen you in terms of what you go on to do yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, I love that mantra that scars become muscles, and that they end up aiding you in the future. Um, you talked there about in your early years, one of the themes of your childhood was this idea of public service. And did that influence you into your career in politics? Was that something that was prevalent in your mind at the time when you were making choices about the path ahead?
Yes, in part, I don't feel like I've made lots of conscious choices. I feel that doors have been presented to me, and I've knocked on them and they've opened. And I would say 100% that it's that sense of public duty which has shaped my approach to work and to career. I I've always been inspired by, I suppose, the way I was brought up, which was certainly not driven by a love of money or a love of fame or a love of power. It was a need and a call that took us to India. And in the same way today, I can see needs, and I can see the fact that I have been taken through a door that opened into this role. And I think it's so critical when it comes to uh, understanding why you're in a position like this, and making sure that fame, power, money doesn't go to your head, to keep bringing it back to basic principles, which is, why are you there? And for me, it's got to be duty. And I certainly think in the cut and thrust of politics, which can be a very tough, isolated gig at the best of times, you've got to have something that's bigger than money, fame, or power that keeps you there, because those things are not sufficient. It's got to be a sense of calling and of public duty.
Now that should be helpful, Kate. I'm sure that there would be lots of people who would agree that politics was definitely a vocation, rather than a career that you choose. But it's encouraging to hear you talk about the sense of calling and a sense of public duty and of service. I mean, obviously, being appointed cabinet secretary for finance must have been a tremendous privilege. What have been the other standout moments in your career so far? And God willing, you'll have a long career ahead of you still to come.
Well, we'll see about that. I think that's in the voters' hands next May. But in terms of standout moments, for me, it's usually the moments that would never make it on the front page of a newspaper. So I think that often people think of a politician's job or work as being primarily the cut and thrust of debate in the parliament, or on some of the news channels. And actually, the bread and butter of my job is representing people in my constituency and trying to help them. And people usually come to me when they've gone down every other avenue and not got a result. And so they've come to me trying to look for help. And when you can get a result for people through just sheer grit and determination, that gives you the biggest boost. So I think that would be the first one, but that's never going to be on the front page news. It's going to be between me and the individual that came to me for help. The second thing, though, is when I'm able to combine my faith and my role in a very unapologetic way. So, you know, there are many people on all sides of the political debate. There are many people in church pews, there are many people in Parliament that would question whether I really can do that. And it's rare to be able to just do it in a very unapologetic way. But being able to share my faith and talk about my political role gives me enormous pleasure. So I think those two elements are the things that give me the motivation to keep doing the job. In terms of standout moments, I think you'll have seen from newspaper headlines perhaps the standout moments that other people have identified. But most of the if I were to ever write memoirs of the points at which I was most delighted with what had been achieved, it will be probably the things that are not seen on the front pages.
Well, Kate, let us know if you ever do write your memoirs, and you can come back and we'll interview you again, and you can promote them that way. I mean, as a politician, Kate, your professional life is open to public and media scrutiny. You've talked about, you know, the principles that you have. I mean, can you sum up the sort of guiding principles that help you navigate your professional life when it is under such intense scrutiny all the time?
Yeah, and those principles have been challenging. So when I started in this job, nobody gives you a guidebook. The nature of politics is that everybody has an opinion, but actually when, you know, the rubber hits the road, it's very difficult to know how to apply principles and apply views and opinions when you're dealing with a very messy world, and you may be clear in your own mind what is black and what is white, and I get that, but then applying that to Scotland, to our society, to our communities can be very difficult. So having those principles is something that I have probably worked on over the last few years. But I would say that in no particular order, the two principles that guide are one, what does it genuinely mean to love my neighbour? So, you know, if we take the two basic commandments as being, you know, to love God with all that you are and to love your neighbour as yourself. On that second point, what does that mean? Because when it comes to my role, that's essentially what I'm here to do, is to learn how to love my neighbour. And sometimes it can be very difficult, especially when you're a people pleaser, to love your neighbour in a way that actually is meaningful and makes a difference. Sometimes it's being there to listen. Sometimes it's being there to take difficult decisions. And sometimes the answer isn't obvious. Sometimes it's the better of two bad options. Sometimes it's the better of two good options. So what does it mean to love your neighbour? And each decision requires very careful thought. And that's where we see it, you know, and just to take the jugular, something like the hate crime bill right now, which is being widely debated. What does it mean to love my neighbour? To, on one hand, ensure that there is freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, freedom of religious practice, and on the other hand, recognise that actually my neighbours, some of my neighbours, are on the receiving end of some pretty brutal vitriol and abuse. So it's very easy, I think, to have strong principles on a Sunday morning sitting in a pew that you think you can apply in a black and white way. But you then get to Monday morning and you realise the world is not as simple and straightforward as you would think. But if that's one principle, then obviously the second principle is recognising that I have a higher judge who knows my heart better than anybody else does. And in this job, of course, everybody has a strong opinion on what I should and shouldn't be doing, and why I'm doing it or why I'm not doing it, and what my motivation is, and whether I'm just in it for myself and whether I'm just deceiving myself, etc., etc., etc. And it's a great relief to know that actually I'm ultimately accountable to somebody who doesn't just weigh up my public actions, but weighs up my private actions as well. And at times when I'm criticised for things that I do publicly, I think, my goodness, if you knew half of what I do in private, you'd have even more reason to criticise me. So I think for me, those are obviously the two global truths that master not just what I do, but the way I do it. And then, there's plenty of other principles that flow from those.
I mean, that's a really helpful explanation. I think you draw out two really interesting principles there. One, which is that, establishing your principles in advance, knowing what your principles are before you're actually called to try and apply them in practice is important. And, hearing that loving your neighbour as you love yourself, or doing unto others as you would have them do, is a really significant and important guiding principle. And how people might consider that in the abstract is totally different to what it feels like when you're actually making difficult decisions. And I think the second principle that you draw out about, I've heard it said that as a Christian, you really live your life before an audience of one. And obviously, as a politician, being under intense media and public scrutiny all the time for all of the decisions, good and bad, and with all of the various perceptions that attach to those judgments, that actually it's good to know that actually, you have a higher judge, and it's his opinion that ultimately matters at the end of the day. What effect, I mean, you talked about, the guiding principles, these are clearly just lifted straight out of the Bible. What other effect does your faith have on your everyday life in terms of the job that you do and in your personal life?
It has the same impact on my personal life as it would have on the personal life of a nurse, of a doctor, of a bin man, of somebody working in an office, in that I am here to do a job, and there's certain characteristics that I want to define the way that I work. I want to have a strong work ethic. I want to be characterized by integrity and honesty. And those are laudable aims. Sometimes they're easier to do than others, but in the same way that a doctor or a nurse, just to use those as an example, will want to do a good job, so do I. And my job is to represent my constituents. My job is to bring my thinking to the table when it comes to difficult decisions that need to be made. And at the moment, it's, from a financial perspective, managing the nation's finances. But I think too, none of us are isolated creatures. So I am a woman. I can't cut that out of, I'm a female. I am 30 years old. I have a particular background and experience. I have particular skills and gifts, and there's other things I can't do so well. So we are all products of our circumstances and who we are. And from that perspective, faith is just as much a part of my identity as anything else. And I wholeheartedly believe that none of those protected characteristics should prevent anybody from taking up public office, or should prevent anybody from being able to represent their constituents well in the Scottish Parliament. And I think that if we want a diverse Parliament, that requires diverse voices. And therefore, it also should include voices with knowledge and experience and a love of faith, as well as anything else. So I've now gone off on a tangent, and I can't quite remember what your question originally was. So I hope that is an answer to it.
No, it's a good answer to the question. I mean, it ties in nicely with what you said at the start of that answer, which is that you feel that what you are and the experiences that you've had have helped shape you and guide you into the role that you have today, and that actually the principles that you've grown up with and that you've taken on board yourself are the principles that guide you in the work that you're doing. And that hard work ethic, but behind the hard work ethic, the principle of loving God and doing to your neighbour as you would have them do to you. And I mean, these are really helpful. I mean, there's a lot of people who are out there who will be in different walks of life and different spheres of influence, and these principles hold water regardless of whether I think you're applying them in a political sphere or whether you're applying them in every other walk of life. And it was interesting to hear you talking about, whether you're a hardworking nurse or you're a policeman or a teacher or the like, that these are principles that will be constants that you can lean on and rely on. Just as we're kind of coming towards the end of this, Kate, and I'm really grateful for taking the time that you've spent with us today. Are there any biblical principles or passages particularly that stand out for you, that are significant and have been significant in your journey of faith so far? And if there are, can you explain to us why it is that they're significant?
Yeah, well, I recently came across a verse that I had scribbled down just before I was selected as a candidate back in 2015, and it was a huge encouragement to read the verse that had encouraged me at that point 5 years on, because it reminds you of a the distance that you've come, but b just the promises that are made early on that do carry you through. And it was from the book of Isaiah in chapter 58, and it's verse 11, and it obviously had meant something to me back then. And it says that the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. And the verses that mean a lot to me are the ones that recognize the state of the world in which we live. There's no point in pretending that the world is a simple place where it's, a land flowing with milk and honey on a continual basis. It just isn't the case. And actually, there are scorched places, there are storms. It feels like in politics, it's a permanent gale force wind that you're battling with. But in that, despite that, there are deeper truths that can take you through that, and that can give you encouragement and can give you joy and peace in the face of situations that should actually take away your peace and your joy. And I've said it in another interview not that long ago, when the morning that I had to give the budget, I was reading the passage where Jesus asks Peter to walk on water. And of course, he's able to do that for as long as he's looking at Jesus and he has faith. The minute he looks at the storms, he starts to sink. And I work and I'm sure many others do, I work in an environment where it is constant storm. If you look at the storms, you're going to sink pretty fast. If you look at something else that can give you a deeper and stronger and more robust anchor, then you can withstand the storms, whatever they are. It could be anything from personal abuse and criticism. It could be just the very nature of trying to respond to a pandemic. It could be sitting with somebody, a constituent, who's gone through the most terrible of times and there's no solution. There's storms everywhere. And the question for me is what's the thing that's going to get you through that storm?
It's a really challenging answer. I think anybody who would look at the role of politicians would consider it to be, a tough ask. You talk there about scorched lands, and I'm sure that family mantra of scars turning into muscle is probably something that you can really resonate with even now. But just so nice to be able to hear that actually your faith provides you with that opportunity, even in the face of these prevailing gales that you talked about, to know joy and peace, when actually those things would seem to be, a distant aspiration in some of the situations that I'm sure you find yourself in on a daily basis. Okay, look, I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been really terrific to speak to you. We're really grateful for you taking the time today to come and share some of your story with us. so much admiration for you and the role that you're in. Terrifying to be reminded that you're only 30, that you've achieved so much. But really encouraging to see how you feel that your life and your early years in this journey of faith that you've been on has been preparing you for the role of public service that you talked about right at the beginning. And just encouraging to hear the principles that guide you, and the things that really cause the rhythm of your heart to beat in terms of looking out for those who are less fortunate, and displaying that attitude of Christ of loving your neighbour as you love yourself, and that encouragement that we have there, but also the great reminder that keeping our eyes focused on Him will allow us to experience joy and peace even in the most difficult situation. So Kate, let me just say thank you ever so much again. Let me thank you on behalf of the people of Scotland for all that you do, and for the way in which you're prepared to take up that mantle of public service, which I'm sure can feel like a thankless task. But it's really terrific just to hear from you and to get an insight into those principles that underpin your career and your life. So thank you very much again.
Thanks very much for having me.